Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, occasional conversations with remarkable people. I'm Len Edgerly. This is the show for Friday, September 10th, 2021. Greetings from Ocean Park, Maine, and welcome to episode 1 of season 2 of the podcast. At the end of this show, I will tell you about my vision for the new season based on what I decided during a month of discernment after concluding the first season just over a month ago. But for now, I'd like to go directly to introducing you to my guest this week. She is Cynthia Bourgeault, a modern-day mystic, Episcopal priest, author, and internationally known retreat leader. When not traveling to present workshops on the Christian contemplative and wisdom paths, she spends time in Stonington, Maine, and in a hermitage on Eagle Island off the coast of Maine. I learned about Cynthia when Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation offered a 14-week online course titled Introductory Wisdom School based on her work. I immediately signed up, and I am now in week 5 of the course. It is based on a workshop that she gave several years ago, and I'm loving every minute of it. We are learning about the Desert Fathers, the Benedictine monastic tradition, centering prayer, G. I. Gurdjieff's three-centered awareness, and embodiment practice, which includes simple but powerful exercises such as full-body prostrations, which I've been trying here on the carpet here in the bedroom of the cottage. As a beginner in wisdom work, I'm not going to risk explaining it to you in my own words. I hope that our conversation will give you a taste for the deep explorations Cynthia and her community are undertaking. And I want to read you a description from wisdomwaypoints.org. That's a new website which features Cynthia's work and offers connections among those walking with her on the wisdom path. On the website, it says, "What is wisdom?" And the answer is, wisdom is not a religion or a doctrine, but a way of knowing. It is not knowing more, but knowing deeper, knowing with more of yourself. It is at the root of all sacred traditions and can be recognized by compassionate intelligence and an alert, present moment awareness. After connecting with Cynthia by Zoom yesterday morning, I suggested that we observe a minute of silence before starting the interview, and I'm going to leave that minute interlude in the podcast. You may be surprised at how long a minute lasts when you experience one in the middle of a show that is usually nonstop talking, and that may be part of the point.
You can hear me okay?
I can hear you okay, Len.
And I hear you just fine. I was wondering if we could start with just a minute of silence. I have a little timer here that could launch us in.
Yeah.
And I think you'll be able to hear the bell when it goes, and then we'll just
I think probably
really look forward to talking.
Otherwise, I'll just watch your body language.
Yeah. When I come back, you'll know. Or here we go. There we go. Nice.
Good.
Well, what's the weather like today on Deer Isle?
Well, it's unsettled. We should get rain anytime, and it's blowing. I think it's the tail end of some sort of hurricane that's spinning itself out up in our part of the world, Larry or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm here and happy to be inside.
I'm in a summer cottage, so I won't be here in 3 or 4 months, but when you're there in December and January, how extreme does the weather get?
It's like all weather, it's usually not bad.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff that you do in the summer, except sunbathing, you can do in the winter. You just have to pick your day.
True. Wear a little different clothing. Yeah.
Yeah. But it isn't 6 months of, 80-mile-an-hour winds and driving snow.
Right.
We aren't Nebraska.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, it's sort of, I've been immersed in your work because I'm taking this Center for Action and Contemplation Wisdom School, the introductory wisdom school based around this stuff, and I've been reading. But I knowing that you traveled a lot before COVID, if you were on a plane and you found yourself next to another passenger who wanted to talk, and they said, "Well, what do you do?" I wondered what that moment of introducing yourself to someone who's not familiar with this work looks like. What would you say if someone in the next seat said, "Oh, Cynthia, what do you do?"
Well, I usually start by assessing the depth and seriousness of the question.
Yeah.
Because if they're just passing the time of day, or if they're doing the usual kinds of things of just, human beings that have an inventory list for accessing other human beings. And so if it's just the usual thing you say on an inventory list, I'll generally say something that's a little evasive until there's genuine interest. I usually tell people I teach the Christian spiritual arts. And if that intrigues anything in them, then they'll push a little farther. If they say, "What are the Christian spiritual arts?" then you can begin to have a conversation. And if they go ballistic at the Christian word, you don't say anything further. And as soon as I drop the meditation word in, if they go ballistic then we can get back to talking about vacation cottages in Maine.
You're giving them various exit ramps to escape by different words that might trigger them.
Yeah, I mean, the most valuable lesson I ever learned in spiritual practice came from an English teacher who actually says there's a great difference between self-expression and communication. And self-expression is based on what you want to give and pour out. And communication is based on what the other person can receive.
Yeah, exactly.
And if there isn't communication, you've just wasted a lot of breath. So it's always the accessing the ground of, how much communication, what kind of communication, and where do you go?
Yeah. You sort of start listening before you're even talking.
Yeah.
Well, and I know that. I also attended that day-long practice session for the Wisdom Community, the August 28th, and I was struck by how your life changed so dramatically when COVID hit, because you had times of solitude there, and then you would travel. I guess I'd be curious, what was the rhythm of your year up until COVID, and then what changed? What changes happened that year, and now what does the rhythm of your year look like going forward?
The rhythm before was pretty much out straight, and it had a kind of seasonal pattern to it. I still try to conserve as much time as I can during the summer for boating season and that kind of thing, which got, of course, majorly interrupted by that's where the big CAC annual symposium landed, right in the middle of summer. So, but it was a kind of rhythmic pattern between playing with the boat and writing, and then the retreats that would come up, sometimes once a week, sometimes, but they were a pretty substantial bite. And I was traveling all over the world, was deeply involved with some particularly good groups in the UK and South Africa and New Zealand.
Wow.
So really, literally, it was all over the planet.
Yeah.
And the world groups were particularly strong and keen in wonderful ways, not the least of which was the softening of certain myopias we have in American consciousness. We still think we're the center of the universe. And it was really fun to be with these international groups. So of course that all came to a screeching halt. And it happened very rapidly. I got back from the last extended teaching fling in the UK on the 3rd of March in 2020. And by the end of that week, our state and our town had shut down. Wow. We were into it, and boom, hard stop. So then the question became, what next? As I looked at the empty schedule, of course, things canceled left and right, and all of a sudden we had 6 or 7 free clear weeks, and of course everybody was expecting we were just going to do this little thing for a month and then we all be back, COVID's behind us and off we go. So that coincided with my long winter's nap out on Eagle Island, my remote hermitage anyway. So I just went out there, and what began to become very, very clear to me at once was that I was resistant to simply jumping on board what everybody was doing, which was pivoting to continual Zoom teaching business as usual. That something in me just didn't want to do that. And I didn't know all the reasons for it. I knew some reasons, but there was a strong sense that what was needed was to lean into the silence and put my feet back on the ground and not further disturb the atmosphere with electromagnetic addiction. And the sense of business as usual. So that's what happened. And I did a lot of writing. I started my initial podcast. I was working with a new volume of wonderful kind of exercises for deeper embodiment that had come out of the Gurdjieff tradition that I happened to have with me just before the pandemic hit. So that's what I did. And in the way, I made myself a commitment to working with on-the-ground presence as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So we had a little bit of an opening over the summer of 2020, and we managed to get in 2 or 3 retreats that were fabulous with a group of people that were not overly frightened. They were sort of cautious like everybody else, but they weren't about to let their life be dominated by fear. So we moved during this halcyon time, and then it all shut down really hard again as we went into that season with the political election and its aftermath and the hard assault of COVID. And that was a winter of, continuing to develop the imaginal presence, if you want to call it that, the way that wisdom is communicated by networks other than human lateral communication. And then came the vaccination, and we threw our support as this very, very well-honed little network of people that had had the chance to work together over the summer in a very intense way. We threw it behind really supporting the energy field as the country settled down, as we all got used to the direction that Joe Biden was trying to take things in terms of calming things down, getting the vaccines out there, and calling people to a recalled sense of some of those higher virtues. So we really worked to support that in a nonpartisan way, just because we realized that everything in the planet was overly inflamed, and that the kind of polarization and siloing and conspiracy theories that were emerging from both sides of the political spectrum were a result of this incredible spiritual agitation of the atmosphere. And not only just the outer atmosphere, the stratosphere, but the inner atmosphere. And that had to be addressed with direct energy infusions of peace, gentleness, kindness, spaciousness. So that's been the work. And once the vaccinations became possible, we had another halcyon period, and off we all went, and things are all cranking up again. And so far, they're still moving. I still have a extensive schedule now of overseas travel.
Oh,
that will be opening it up in October if it doesn't collapse.
yeah.
And I'm off to a retreat in South Carolina at the end of the month that on the mystery of death, and hopefully that one will stay put too. We've got a Zoom enhanced component on all of these, but I find without really any kind of comparison to where anybody else is called, I find that where I'm called in this whole thing is to stand on the breaking edge of those that are taking on the on the ground gathering when it becomes possible, and when it's not going to put anybody in excessive harm's way or terror.
You plan on being one of the early adopters of returning to in-person events?
Yeah, I already am, because I'm quite convinced that what really is the essence of wisdom transmission can only be conveyed one-on-one. You know, these technicalities, these modalities that we're using, do a wonderful job at simulating them.
Right.
And they're better than nothing. Mm-hmm. And when you use them for what they're really intended for, which is information conveyance, plus just a little kind of trailer of what actual energetic communion is like, they're better than nothing. But I know that there is a particular reason that we're embodied in this planet, and that there's an interface that goes on body to body that is important to the whole cosmos, and I have to tend that.
Well, a couple of questions that occur as you're talking. The Eagle Island, is that a place you can go year round for retreats?
Well, sort of. I pull my own little 10-foot Boston whaler out of the water in October. So for the rest of the year, I'm dependent on the mail boat and the caretaker that goes out to Eagle Island a couple of times a week, weather permitting.
I see.
And if the boat is going and the captain is willing to take me along, then I get out to Eagle. And if not, I sort of stay on the mainland and look wistfully westward.
Yeah, yeah. When you're in that time of solitude there, especially in this period that we're talking about, where there was more time, were you kind of going deeper into your meditation practice, or did you arrive at any new places because there was the opening that COVID provided?
Well, I think to the second question, absolutely yes. That I think that if you want to look at COVID from a kind of divine providence point of view, mm-hmm. It called the question on our frantic, evasive human overbusyness and what I would call the commodification of spirituality. You know, everybody's got a website. Everybody was doing retreats. Retreat centers were proliferating, and they were looking more and more like luxury boutique hotels. And, you know, everybody was kind of into this enlightenment at a weekend model that was really sort of scaled to the upper class. And the whole thing was easy and soft. And it collapsed. And the retreat centers have been across the board the most fearful places to work.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they're very, very concerned about, you know, the protocols and the safety of the people. You do far better to have a spiritual conference at a Holiday Inn these days in terms of just keeping a safe atmosphere. But the retreat centers and particularly the churches that have retreat centers, the monastic retreat centers, have tended to be very, very closed. And of course, part of that is because their populations are almost entirely senior citizens.
Right. Yeah.
And when they didn't have vaccinations available, everybody was really, really scared of protecting their. But the whole question, if God was asking us to weigh in and vote as a human condition on religious Christians on whether I live or die, I am the Lord's, I would say that Christianity flunked the test miserably.
Because they were distracted by other shiny objects, having the best website and, as you say, the commodification of it.
Yeah, well, it partly is selfless. I mean, everybody is still scared shitless of death.
I see. Yeah.
And that still revealed itself as the bottom line, and that all teaching on Christ and all the Eucharist and everything like that, it was a story. And when people got panicked about their own head being on the chopping block, they couldn't apply the story anymore. And that's been a bitter disappointment to me. And of course, it's all smoothed over in smooth language. You know, the smooth language of, well, we wanted to protect our older people, and it's just community service, and it's just the basic kindness, and that's not that that's untrue, but that for me it's inadequate. That and it's a severe deterioration from how people were dealing back in the 700 years ago in the Black Death and things. There were still people in religion who realized that at the moment of being baptized into Christ, you are also martyred for Christ. And whether you live or die, you are the Lord's, and you go where love takes you. And without any sort of reckless sense that I got Jesus in my hip pocket, so I won't die.
Yeah.
It's more like I got Jesus in my hip pocket, so I will die. But that dying will be to the glory of love.
Well, and there's some wonderful material in the course I'm taking about the Benedictine monastic tradition as a template for transformation. I hadn't thought of it before, but was Benedict contemporaneous with the plague, and did the monasteries have a chance to show their stuff in kind of a similar situation, actually much worse than what we've got? But what do you know about that intersection?
Well, Benedict was quite, he was basically 900 years ahead of the Black Plague.
I see.
But he lived in an era of human crisis. He was born sometime, as most scholars put it together, in the late 4th, 5th century and on into the early 6th, which meant that his young upbringing was spent with the final destruction of the Roman Empire, which happened in 476 AD.
Yeah.
So
the barbarians were literally at the gate.
Yeah, they were literally at the gate, and a cultural structure that had held the world together actively for 200 years and probably passively for 1,000 years at least before that was disintegrating before their eyes. So in that sense, he was dealing with a similar situation that we have on our plate right now, with that many people are seeing that this is, that COVID is just the arrowhead on the spear that's really aimed right at the heart of Western civilization, with its arrogance and its mentalness and its hypocrisy.
And you've got climate change kind of as part of the same arrow.
Yeah, exactly. Reinforcing each other, and it's a whole Mobius strip, because you can't pick up one without getting all the other. And anybody who thinks that COVID and the climate change are not related is just into wishful thinking.
When you were talking about supporting the energy field in response to COVID and sort of with the people that you were able to meet with, what form did that take? But prior to COVID, my wife and I got very active. We worked very hard on the Mayor Pete campaign, and we went door to door, and we went to Iowa. We did all this stuff. And as I think about coming out of this time of more contemplation, I can picture doing political work, but I'm not reading daily news. I've unsubscribed from all the newspapers. I'm off Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of this. I've sort of created some space for myself. And I'm wondering, what does action look like that's informed by, what you experience when you meditate? And in that period where you were supporting the energy field, how were people posting somewhere, or how just one-on-one conversations with people that they needed to connect with? What did that look like?
Well, these are really, really good questions, Len, and thank you for asking them, because they're the heart of the whole thing. And it's really not simple to answer it directly or to respond. It's sort of like where you started. I was sitting down with somebody in an airplane, and I would say when you're finished with Intro Wisdom School, go look up my spirituality and practice course on gifts from the Imaginal Realm.
Okay.
Because I take this apart much more systematically there. But I'll try to give you the quick recap here. The bottom line is that these things that we, as in our usual level of consciousness, call virtues, are actually at a more subtle realm of being that interpenetrates us at that kingdom of heaven level, as Jesus called it, energy packets. And they come with nutrients for the planet, and you know that when you have a home cooked hamburger as opposed to a McDonald's slab of cardboard,
right.
You know that goodness is a substance. You can taste it. And when St. Paul talked about the fruit of the Spirit, joy, gentleness, peace, forbearance, patience, all those things, these are not just admirable qualities. These are actual things, like you can pop them in your mouth and your body is nourished.
Wow.
Not just your inner body, but your outer body. Trust is one such thing. Mm-hmm. And when the planet is malnourished, chaos results. So that's the general theme. That the idea is that you can, at a certain level of wisdom work, collect your body and your will and your heart and offer on the altar of your own heart a direct infusion of these qualities, as well as a kind of dialysis where you absorb into yourself some of the toxicity that's out there.
Wow.
And let it be neutralized within your being. That practice is called Tonglen, and there's a whole line of great teaching in the Tibetan Buddhist teaching about that. It's not an immature practice. Now, the hook in this is that there's a lot of people that are kind of shaman wannabes that they get together and do it. Let's all just get together and hold hands and generate peace and good, and this is at too superficial and too willful a level. It's not ineffective there, but it's too infected by story, by emotionality, by sentimentality. And so that as you do the work of embodiment, there's actually that subtler being body is within you, as Jesus talked about it. And as you learn to feed and become sensitized to that, that's what's actually doing the work of the exchange between the levels. That's what I knew already in my mind, but really discovered during that first part of the timeout in COVID, when instead of Zooming all the time, I was working with the embodiment exercises. So it's not so much even a matter of sitting down and thinking about beautiful things and opening your life or deepening your practice. I mean, God knows all that stuff instantly about you. You sit down, you open your heart, you relax your body, you say yes, you put no stories around it, and you simply offer the altar of your embodiment in any way it can, and without making a big deal about it, because then it quickly becomes a story about yourself. And the alert, responsive, attuned inner bodily structure will start to do the work.
Wow.
And you don't have to fuss about it, and you don't have to be attached to it with your identity. And the other question you wrote about communication, we don't even need any horizontal communication. I knew that the people who were working got it, and they'd work because it's instantly available it's kind of an inner web is built out of these embodied intentions. And so there wasn't any Facebook chat, and there isn't how many souls are saved today, or there's none of that kind of stuff. There's just a real sense that the work was carrying us, and it also transcends the space-time continuum and actively engages with what you might call the saints, the watchers, and the holy ones that surround and care for this planet, and allow us to sense that tremendous tenderness and solicitude in which our fragile earth is held, which again gives you some hope to cut through all the panic and hysteria, and we're all going to die, and to face that we aren't in charge of this show, but that we're valued. We're held far more preciously than we hold ourselves.
I'd like to finish sort of a question out of my own meditation practice, which has been a little bit nudged by the introductory wisdom course, because I did 10 years of Zen study in Denver, and 3 sessions a year, and so sitting with half gaze as opposed to closing the eyes, and the distinction you make between the 2 kinds of meditation, and I've enjoyed mixing things up. To meditate with my eyes closed is a big change for me, and I'm enjoying that. But the one thing that you talk about the 3-centered awareness out of Gurdjieff, the intellectual, the emotional, and the moving center. And as I meditate, I sort of understand the moving center part. My feet are on the ground. I'm feeling my body as I meditate. I take the intellectual center as the one that's maybe setting the watch on my timer and giving me a structure and helping me return to the sacred word. I'm less clear on what is my emotional center. What role is my emotional center playing when I sit for 20 minutes with centering prayer?
Yeah. Well, you can't really get a meaningful answer at that level of the question.
Okay.
Because what you're doing is creating a schematic.
Yeah.
And the schematic is illusory. What will really happen is that eventually the emotional center, which tends to be all about me and how I'm responding to things, will give way to feeling. And feeling is interesting because it's both deeper and it's multivalent. I mean, it always has the other in it, the opposite in it, and it's impartial. But this will happen in and as you discover that the moving center is about a lot more than just keeping your body comfortable.
I see.
And that there are always micro energy currents running through your body, even in deep meditation, and you might say especially in deep meditation, that are connecting one part of the body with the other, that these 3 forces, these 3 centers actually live in some part in every part of our body. And as you begin to understand that it's alive down there in your own embodiment, and that what meditation does is simply clear the decks by kind of shutting off the dominance of the thinking center, that this whole subtle, bionome of aliveness within you begins to activate. And as that begins to happen, then very occasionally you will begin to discover how feeling and moving and intellect are handing off to each other constantly. And it becomes rich and enlivening. And practices are not things you do to acquire God or to get an A+ or to master something. It's basically like opening a window in the stuffy air of your building so that a fresh breeze of aliveness can move through. And it's what goes on in the practice itself that's the conversation. It's not preparation for conversation. It's a deepening attunement to the wonder of everything that holds you up. So if you keep working at it, these deeper sensibilities and awarenesses should gradually awaken in you.
I see. Then I'll
and
understand
of course,
them.
Yeah, you'll understand as your own embodied understanding deepens.
Yeah. That definitely gives me a motivation to keep at it, because it sounds pretty rich.
With regard, Len, to the eyes open or eyes shut, it's a really interesting question, and there's something to be said for both learning tracks. The eyes open and soft focus, as you learn from your Buddhist practice, does encourage and force a deeper, a more scrupulous ability to observe, to stay alert, than you have in centering prayer. And very often in centering prayer, when people are just falling asleep, a teacher will ask them to open their eyes slightly, because it puts your attention in a slightly different place. Centering prayer is really go for broke, teaching you about total yielding, total surrender, letting go of anything you hang on to that's I, and trusting the free fall into the heart of God. So they're working with slightly different goals, and I would say they're complementary goals. They certainly are not opposite doctrinal practices. And one of the exercises I've worked on that I was exposed to during that time of the COVID shutdown had eyes open for 5 minutes in soft gaze, taking in the stuff of the world without naming and inventorying, eyes closed for 5 minutes, but continuing to maintain that same alertness, and then eyes open again, maintaining the alertness to both inner and outer simultaneously. So you do have some control about where you set the level of your attention. And most spiritual practices won't tell you that, but it's really important, because it runs on a gamut, and it's not always best for it to be set at one stuck position on a throttle. But as you learn that every setting of your attention brings with it loss and gain, then you can slide along yourself and begin to encounter the dialogue with meditation in a whole new way.
Yeah, you get more instruments to use for the.
Exactly.
Are you working on a new book, or what's on the horizon in terms of your work that people might be able to look forward to?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I've got, there's a couple of books out there, but what is actually going to emerge on the other side of this pandemic, pandemonium? I don't know. What I found myself doing, and it's rather a surprise to me, is I've been doing a lot of work with civics for wisdom students, which is in a sense more quote quote political than things I've done before, but not partisan political, not like how are we ever going to ram the liberal progressive social agenda down people's throats in the name of Christ. It's not that kind of thing. It's more like, how do we bring these wisdom gifts, these fruit of the Spirit, and cultivate impartiality so people are able to stand their ground in a way that's not polarized or terrified. And I would say that my life works on compass points at this point, and the vertical axis is called free fall. And
so the vertical is called free fall, and what's the horizontal?
Sideways.
Sideways, I see.
Yeah, so that's my movement, and what will emerge out of that axis when everything is over. I'd love to write a book on Teilhard and Gebser and integral approach, incarnational instancy approach, but I don't know whether that will happen. I really just have to see what's needed, And really, I've been flying blind more than I've ever been flying blind before, just kind of responding moment to moment to what's needed.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thanks so much for joining me here. I have been speaking with Cynthia Bourgeault, a modern-day mystic, Episcopal priest, and international retreat leader. Thanks very much, Cynthia.
Thank you, Len. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
I will have a link to Cynthia's books that you can read on Kindle in the show notes. She's a beautiful writer, very powerful writer, and her topics include centering prayer. She worked for years with Thomas Keating, who was really kind of the founder or the main person who got centering prayer back into wide use across the country as an ancient method of prayer. And he was involved in really a movement called the Contemplative Prayer Movement, I believe. But anyway, she writes about that, the Holy Trinity, Mary Magdalene. I love that she is a Mainer, and she drives her own Boston Whaler to get to her hermitage on Eagle Island. She's a few years older than I am, and I find her to be an inspiring model for, as she said in a recent one-day workshop that I attended online, doubling down on the work closest to her heart. As I considered what's closest to my heart during August, the month I turned 71 this year, I realized that conversations and interviews have been my passion ever since I was reporting for the Crimson, Harvard's daily undergraduate newspaper. What I'm now calling Season 1 of the Kindle Chronicles, which comprised a show every Friday for 13 years, gave me the privilege of conducting 677 interviews with authors, Amazon execs, tech experts, and family and friends. I seriously considered not continuing the show, that Season 2 would just have one episode saying, well, you know, it's I'm putting that in the past. And that's because when I put up the last show on July 24th, I realized how sweet it was to have a whole week here at the beach without worrying about booking a guest, preparing an interview, and then climbing what I call Podcast Mountain every Friday. But as the month wore on, I knew that I was not ready to give up the chance to continue to have these kinds of really satisfying conversations. I did, however, come to understand that I feel kind of talked out on the topic of Amazon and even the Kindle as a weekly focus. I still love Amazon's innovating spirit. I'm a huge fan of Jeff Bezos and the Kindle platform. But, you know, it was kind of nice to admit that reading The Economist every week cover to cover on paper was sheer joy for me. I underlined it. I carried the drooping pages with me to the beach and back. And in my mode of being the Kindle Chronicles guy, I think I sort of felt, well, gee, I can't admit I like paper or anything. I still prefer to read books in the Kindle, but I'm out of the evangelism business for the Kindle and Amazon, and there's some freedom in that. I started this summer on June 10th with what I call the See You in September project of going off Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and today marks the end of that 90-day experiment without them. Same for the major daily newspapers, the Times, the Post, the Financial Times, and I just haven't missed them, to be honest. In the space created by what, See You in September, I was drawn to Richard Rohr's Daily Meditation, an online course on his book Immortal Diamond, and now Cynthia's course on wisdom. I've been doing a lot more sitting meditation. I've been spending more time with Darlene and visiting family members, picking blueberries, and generally enjoying a slower pace. What this means for Season 2 is that I will not be releasing a show every week. I can imagine maybe a bi-weekly rhythm, but I'm not going to hold myself to that either. I'm going to follow my heart in choosing guests, and I'm sure I will return to authors and some of the regulars from Season 1. And if Amazon invites me to a product briefing for a new Kindle, I will eagerly step into journalism mode and tell you what I think. I may return to the clubhouse gatherings after each show, but for the next few weeks, we're going to be very busy as we return to Cambridge from Maine and get ready for a Western adventure that will take us to Bozeman, Montana to see our friends Tom and Tish, and then we will drive from there with our niece Liz, her dog, and 2 cats. About 3 weeks ago, Darlene and her sister Deb here were in a real serious crash in the Tesla, the Model Y we had, and, filled with gratitude that they weren't seriously hurt. They checked out at the Southern Maine Medical emergency room and no internal injuries, lots of bruises, and really shook up. I mean, when the car was totaled, and when I went and saw it, it got run into an electrical pole and got crunched at a really dangerous, kind of creepy intersection on a rural road. The people in the other car were not hurt either, luckily. But that led to, we got a good insurance settlement from Amica, and I found a used Model Y, a white one, at a Toyota dealer in Boulder. And so I'm going to fly out September 28th and pick up the car in Boulder and then drive it to Casper, where I'll have a chance to see some of my old friends from our Casper days, and then on up to Bozeman. Darlene will fly to Bozeman, and we'll spend time with Tom and Tish, and then we'll hook up with Liz and drive the new Tesla back to Boston. We have named the new Tesla Grace, and that's because of our gratitude for how the last one did such a good job protecting Darlene and her sister in just a really tough accident. So that's the last 3 weeks for sure have been informed by gratitude and, just kind of getting over that sort of a trauma. With that, Season 2 has begun, and I'm looking forward to where it will take us. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me at podchronicles@gmail.com. I know some of you listening to this have been part of the show since TKC1 on July 26, 2008. What an honor. I have to say, I almost don't even know what to think of the fact that there are many of you out there that have listened to every single show I've done. It just feels, it's a privilege, and it fills me with gratitude. And I hope you continue to find something worth listening to here at the Kindle Chronicles 2.0 for a long time to come. A note about the music. I decided to switch to some simple music of my own composition for the intro and bumper. What you heard is the chords to a song I'm calling My Next Move, and I'm still working on it. It's fun. I like the sound of it. And the Ramonk music by Eval Monaghat was a terrific theme song for 13 years, and I'm glad to retire it as the signature music for Season 1. And probably Season 2 will be very simple intro music that I'll play for you myself. Tech note, I had everything set up for this episode, except I lost the connecting cable between my Blue Yeti microphone and my computer, and I realized this just before I was going to connect with Cynthia for Zoom. I had planned to just do some meditating and be like a Zen master as I sat down with her. Instead, I was totally panicked on how I was going to record the interview. I ended up doing it on my AirPods Max, which are these really nice Apple headphones. The sound is not great. Luckily, her sound on her end was very good. And I can't record the voiceover on the AirPods Max, I just discovered, with Logic Pro, so I'm recording the voiceover on my iPhone and then porting it over. So I guess I got a little rusty after a month off the job, and I'll have all of my tech gear back in place for episode 2 whenever that comes. This is Len Edgerly in Ocean Park, Maine. Thanks for listening.